Hello. So we're a few minutes after the start of the hour here. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. My name is Amanda Sherratt. I'm the Senior Associate Director for International Recruitment here at Binghamton University. And today we are sharing with you part one of our mini lecture series. For your enjoyment. And the reason that we're doing this is we really want our incoming students to get a good feel of what it's like to be in a Binghamton University class, even if it is just a snippet, and get the opportunity to interact with one of our professors here at Binghamton. So today I have with me Dr. Sara Velardi, and she is a lecturer of geological sciences and environmental studies here at Binghamton University. Her research and teaching interests and focus on the human dimensions of agriculture and natural resources, agri-food policy, biotechnology and food systems. And today, Professor Velardi will be sharing her research centered around maple syrup and bees in this faculty mini session entitled The Sweet Taste of Environmental Studies. So you may have questions throughout the presentation today, and as you do, please feel free to put those in the Q&A section that you'll see there. I will be monitoring that to look at any admissions questions you might have, and I'm happy to take those. But also, please feel free to put the questions you may have about the lecture. And I will go ahead and have a Q&A session with Professor Velardi right at the end of her full presentation. So without further ado, I'm going to send it over to Sara. Thank you, Sara, and welcome.
Great. Thank you so much, Amanda. So I will share my screen. So thank you. I'm very excited to be here today talking about the sweet taste of environmental studies. So I hope to tell you a little bit more about the environmental studies program here at Binghamton, some of the types of classes that I teach, and the community engagement that I try to invoke in my and involve in my classes, and in particular talk about my maple and bees class and how that is built from some of the research that I have done. So just to start with a poll for today, just to ask why you're tuning in, just to gauge a little bit of interest there. So I'll start that poll now. All right, so it looks like interest in learning about environmental studies and interest also in Sweet Harvest, the class, and community engaged experiences. So great. So just a little bit about the environmental science, environmental studies program here. So you have the option of getting a BS or a BA. I've listed some of the sort of core classes of the environmental studies program. So students will take NVI 101 and 201, humans and the ecological environment and the physical environment, really giving that base to understanding our local environment and how humans interact with it. A common is introduction to environmental policy. And then our upper level courses include classes like environmental planning or a capstone class, and then also having internships in environmental studies is something that is important, and we of course greatly value in the program here, and students can have the opportunity to partake in a variety of internships. So then also as a part of the program in the major, there are a variety of what we say are specializations or tracks that students can take part in. So they can be more natural science or ecosystem focused tracks where you're doing more lab type classes, going out, collecting data, looking at sort of observing the natural world. So including tracks with ecosystems, earth sciences and natural resources, environmental chemistry. And then we also have tracks that have a little bit more of what you could say is like the social science and humanities aspect, focusing on public policy and law, environmental planning, environmental economics, or ecological anthropology. So you really get a variety of options there. And within talking about those different specializations and tracks, we have a diversity of courses within the major. So I just kind of picked up a handful of ones that are listed in our course catalog, with environmental chemistry, GIS, spatial analysis, which is becoming much more and more of a resource and a skill in the job market that is very valuable. Environmental hydrology. We have fungi and soils classes. I like the name of this soils class, Soils, Life and Death Underfoot. That's taught by Dr. Meindl here. And then I also just wanted to highlight that we have a good number of classes that are also food and agriculture focused. So I teach the top two there. I teach a food policy class, which actually I'll reference at the end of this webinar. I also teach a class on agricultural biotechnology, looking at the science, policy, and social conflict around this particular type of technology. And then we also have classes on campus, one called Farm to Table, which has students learning about the way food is produced, harvested, and prepared, which takes advantage of the farm that we have on campus, BU Acres. And then we also have ecological agriculture as well. And then one of the, I think, major features of Binghamton University that's so valuable that we have here, and especially in environmental studies, is our BU Nature Preserve. So it encompasses 180 acres on campus, includes many different walking trails. We have a 200-acre wetland, and here we have a diversity of species, birds, beavers, all types of amphibians. And we can say it's kind of referred to as a living laboratory because many different types of classes are able to take advantage of this resource, go out, collect data, conduct experiments. I use this resource a lot in many of my classes, and I know that many other classes, especially in environmental studies and biology, will take advantage of this resource. And in particular, there is the Nature Preserve steward, Dylan Horvath, actually teaches a class on the natural history of the Nature Preserve, which is a really popular class that students love to take. So one of the courses that I teach that we go out into the nature preserve a lot is called Ecology of the Northeastern US. So it's a field-based course. We go out in labs, we collect data, we do observations, and I sort of describe it as kind of this elevational tour of ecosystems in the Northeast. So we kind of start at low-lying wetlands and then work our way up to alpine summits and understanding the different types of organisms that inhabit these areas. As part of the class, some of the labs that we do, again, going out into the nature preserve, we do some macroinvertebrate investigations, going out, seeing what bugs live in those wetlands. We do a lot of tree IDing, where we go out around campus and look at different trees on campus and also those in the nature preserve. We also contribute to citizen science as part of the class. We look at invasive species that we are finding on campus and actually upload this data to IMAP Invasives, which is an overall database that New York State collects information on where different invasive species are. So we help contribute to that database. And then we do also different sorts of ID and different grasses ID, different wildflower ID as well. And as I had mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, I really tried to have different sorts of community engagement in my classes. So for my Ecology of the Northeastern US class, we have community engagement with the City of Binghamton Parks and Recreation. And I have some pictures there of students who helped with this project a couple of years ago, where the City of Binghamton has this tree keeper website where the urban forestry program there will keep track of what types of trees are in the city. So looking at species ID, they'll take measurements such as diameter at breast height, which is what in both of these pictures, these students are measuring DBH there. They'll also take height. And they also want to assess the overall health of these trees. They also want to note, are these trees in danger of hitting power lines? Are there any obstructions near these trees? So we, our class got to help the Parks Department in collecting this data and got to go out to different parks in the city and document some of this data, upload it to that tree keeper database and help them with collecting it. So I think it was a really cool experience for the students in actually doing data collection that mattered. They could see that data collection in real time on this website. And then, of course, I think benefiting the City of Binghamton Parks and Rec with having students, having more individuals help collect some of this data too. So then talking about one of the classes that I teach on campus and currently I'm teaching right now is Sweet Harvest Bees and Maple. So it's a class focused on bees and maple syrup. So this class is actually built from my postdoc research experience when I was at the University of Maine. And the research that I worked on there and am still working on currently is looking at how are maple syrup producers and beekeepers making scale management decisions. Are they wanting to get larger and are facing challenges that make them unable to? Are they sort of, optimizing off of being smaller and cornering that particular market? So a part of understanding how they were making scale management decisions, we also learned about common challenges that small and medium-sized producers are facing. And also learned too how producers are learning and sharing knowledge. So some of the main findings, that we had with coming out of this study was understanding that for lots of producers and beekeepers, access to markets was really important in terms of if they wanted to be getting larger. Also, personal satisfaction was tied to their size and overall scale decisions rather. For some, they just really were kind of felt like they were couldn't necessarily contribute more time and effort to growing any larger. So they wanted to stay small because they enjoyed the size that they were operating at. And some limitations and common challenges that we identified were overall lack of capital in wanting to increase and purchasing equipment to then get to that next level. Overall lack of infrastructure as well. I don't know if anyone has been to Maine, but Maine is quite a large state and is quite rural for the majority of the state as well. So there was just, issues with kind of packaging and distributing and things like that directed and impacted some producers' management decisions. And then also a lack of maple stands. For some producers, particularly in southern counties of Maine, we're finding that there just weren't as many maple trees to be able to grow as large as they wanted to. And then we also found too, in understanding how producers were learning and sharing knowledge, that many relied on sort of this combination of formal and informal learning. So relying on things like cooperative extension or producer association or beekeeper association to learn, but then also having these informal relationships with one another, that they could just kind of stop by a friend's sugar house and ask them how they did something, or call up a beekeeper that they knew and ask them for advice on something. So we really found this combination of formal and informal learning. So just as a slight trivia question, which state produces the most maple syrup, would you guess? All right, so you are correct. It is Vermont. Vermont, by and far, by and large, produces the most maple syrup. In 2020, they produced over 2 million gallons of syrup. And then next is New York. New York State in 2020 produced about 804,000 gallons. And then Maine followed after. So great. Yes, Vermont is the correct answer there. So just some information about maple syrup. So in order for sap to run, which then turns into syrup, you need freezing nights and warm days to have that pressure change. Sap is, what exactly is it? It's what comes out of the tree. It's a combination of sucrose, minerals, amino acids, and water. For the most part, what maple syrup producers tap are sugar maples, which I have pictured right here. But you also can tap red maples as well. That's a common tree that we see maple syrup producers tapping. So to show kind of this change from sap to syrup, the concentration of sugar in sap is 2 to 3%. So quite low, except actually what's interesting is I taught this class last year and teaching again this year. And what we found on campus, and also what we were hearing from other producers, is that number was quite lower. We were looking more at 1 to 2% of concentration of the sugar in sap this year. So when the sap comes out of the tree, you can see a picture there. It really almost looks like water, again, because that concentration of sugar is so low. But it has overall just kind of a clear color. There might be a little bit of color to it, but overall clear. And usually the ratio we see is that for every 40 gallons of sap, that makes about 1 gallon of syrup. And ultimately, all you're kind of doing is evaporation. You're evaporating that water out of that sap to get it down to syrup, which is 66 to 67% sugar. So I have a picture here. This is what's called an evaporator. And basically what you're trying to do, you have your fuel source, your heat under here. So for the most part, this is commonly filled with wood. So this is a strong fire that's burning, and you have your sap in this metal pan at the top. And because of increased surface area, again, you're just evaporating as much water off as you can, as quickly as you can, to get it boiled down to syrup. So for this class, again, wanting to include community engagement. So we tapped trees on campus. These are pictures from last year. So this was pre-COVID. So we tapped trees on campus here. We actually boiled sap on campus as well, and had a syrup made on campus. We also ran some different experiments as well. So you can see here, this is a tap in the tree that's putting sap into that bucket. And then these two students are measuring the amount of sugar that's in that sap with a refractometer. So we did some different experiments on campus. And we also got to visit some local maple sugar houses. So this was Sugar Creek Maple Farm in Vestal. We got to go and learn about maple syrup production from Mike there, our sugar maker. We got to try some different syrup. So I think it was a lot of fun to be able to have that component to the class. And then also in the class, we talk about bees and honey. So just some facts about bees. There are 3 types of bees, honeybees, that you'll find in a hive. You'll have your queen bee here. She is the largest, and really her only job in a hive is to lay eggs, to reproduce and to lay eggs in the hive. Then we also have our drones right here. So these are all male bees, and actually their really only job is to reproduce as well for other queens. They don't really do anything else in the hive besides that. And then last but not least, we have our worker bees, which do all the jobs in the hive. They build comb, they are the ones that make honey, they fan wings to cool hives, they collect pollen and nectar, specifically referred to as foragers, the ones that go out and do that. And they guard the entrance to the hives as well for any other predators or anything that might be wasps that might be coming in to rob the hive or anything like that. So what exactly is nectar? So what are the bees going out to collect? Well, they're basically going out to collect nectar, which is just water and sugar. So obviously a key task of honeybees that we really care about as humans are pollination. But bees also will collect nectar in order to eat that. They'll even they'll collect the pollen to eat as well. And what they do is they take that nectar back and they add this enzyme to it called invertase. So they take it back to the hive. They actually exchange it with each other. Kind of regurgitating this nectar back and forth between bees and continually adding this invertase. And then they deposit that nectar after it's gone back and forth a bunch of times into these cells, and they fan them to help with evaporation, and then they cap it, and that's how we get our honey. So again, with this class involving some community engagement, so we were able to visit Cutix Honey Farm in Oxford, New York, and they are the largest beekeeper in New York, and they talked to us about a day in the life. They're also migratory beekeepers, so talked about traveling to California to pollinate the almonds, traveling to Maine to pollinate blueberries, helping with pollination in New York as well. So we got to learn about that. And then unfortunately, because of COVID last year, we weren't able to visit the hives on campus or visit local beekeepers' hives. But that is the plan with this class. And we were able to do some virtual beekeeper hive visits this year. So these are actually pictures of visiting hives when I worked in Maine and was teaching a class up there. But that's, again, sort of, we have hives on campus. There is a bee club on campus as well. So it's great to have those resources available for our classes. And then I also just want to talk about 2 other classes that I teach that, again, are part of the environmental studies program and really focus on community engagement. So this is a class that I am planning and hoping to teach in the spring called, in the following spring, called Environmental Education and Communication. So I did my master's work focused on environmental education. I really enjoy it. I think it's really important. And this class would be kind of teaching students about different sorts of environmental education curriculums, such as Project Learning Tree, which I have pictured here, and Project WET. And then working with community partners to do some of this environmental education and communication. So working with the Waterman Conservation Education Center, working with the Roberson Museum and Science Center, which is located in downtown Binghamton, working with the Upper Susquehanna Coalition, which they do a lot of work on restoration of wetlands, planting trees along tributaries, working with landowners and farmers about ways to improve their environments and clean up different areas too. So hopefully this will be an interesting and cool class for students to take to learn about sort of how to do environmental education and then actually be able to do it working with these community partners. And then another class that I teach is called Food Policy, Safety, Health, and Security. So we focus on all different facets of food policy related to food safety laws, nutrition aspects related to policy. So we talk about the Choose My Plate and the nutritional aspects of the USDA programs there. And then we also talk about issues of food access. So we talk about the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program and the different sorts of policies around issues of food access. And we also read this book called The Labor of Lunch. I really enjoyed this book. I think the students, I taught this class last fall, I think the students really enjoyed this book as well. But talking about school lunches and some of the policies that have led to the types of school lunches that we see now, and bringing in this component of how labor and individuals that help with making these school lunches, how all of these things are connected. And we actually got to have the author come and speak about the book and got to do a Q&A with her. So that was also a really cool part of the class, and being able to read this and then ask the author questions about the research that she did and about the work that she did there. And then again, as sort of the community engagement component to this class, we also got to have a guest lecture with someone who helps with Binghamton Food Rescue, but then also students created these recipes and like kids activity worksheets that went along with the recipes for Binghamton Food Rescue that then the Food Rescue was able to distribute to individuals who came out. So again, being able to do projects that really get sort of used, and there's kind of a real world impact there that I think students enjoy having that opportunity to do that. And then just my last poll here is, what types of community partnerships would you be most excited to be a part of in your environmental studies classes? Okay, great. So seeing a little bit of related to involving natural resource managers, so the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation or state foresters, and then also some interest with community organizations that work on a variety of social justice issues related to equity, environment, and food access. Great. Let's see. So that is what I have for you today. And I thank you very much for your time, and I'm happy to take any questions right now. And also, if you have any follow-up questions, my email is there as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Professor Velardi. I do have a few questions that have been put into the Q&A box, but if anybody else has additional questions that they may want to ask, please feel free at this time, and I'll go over what we have so far. So the first question I have here, let me pull it up, is it has to do with the nature preserve. Is the nature preserve only for observation, or is there any intentional manipulation of the environment?
So that's a good question. So I know that Dylan Horvath, who is the steward on campus, who's in charge of the nature preserve. I know that he does a lot of management in terms of, like, we have areas that are early successional, and he tries to keep them early successional and manage them as early successional areas. One piece I didn't actually mention is we do have a good, well, I shouldn't say a good number, but we do have some invasive species on campus and in the nature preserve. And we, as part of my Northeast ecology class, we actually helped with pulling some of those invasive species, digging up some Phragmites. So I know that there is some work actively that's done to manage that area.
Okay, great. Let me get the next one. There's one about maple syrup here. So, do large sugar houses measure the sugar content in making the syrup? Do they use taste samples or do they do both?
So probably for measuring the sugar, they're probably using like some fancy refractometer or some fancy, they'll measure temperature as well. So temperature can tell you also when syrup is done. So they're probably mostly using refractometers or that temperature gauge for those larger sugar houses. Absolutely. Usually you can't 100% tell by taste. We actually tap trees at my house, and we make maple syrup, and we can't tell by taste. We're like tasting it, trying to figure out, like, oh, is this about 66 to 67? And it gets so close at the end that you really do need kind of that fine instrument to measure.
That's interesting. The next question is about worker bees. So we've moved on to the other side, right? Do the worker bees have permanent job specializations or do they rotate responsibilities?
So that's a good question. And usually what we see is they kind of like move on to different levels. So they'll start as nurse bees, which is taking care of the hive. They might be feeding the larva that's developing. They help clean the queen to make sure she's clean and healthy. And then will go on to being foragers, going out and finding good nectar sources, bringing back pollen and nectar, and then also too with guarding the hive. So usually moving on as to different sorts of roles.
Gotcha. Great. Thank you. The next one is another one with the bees. Is the invertase what causes botulum in infants when they eat honey?
Oh, that is a good question. And I am not 100% sure because, yes, there is a concern with that's why essentially infants are not supposed to eat honey right off the bat. But to be honest, off the top of my head, I'm not 100% sure which component of the honey is the reason for that.
Okay. The next one is back to the nature preserve. I think that's a special place in all of our hearts. So, what can I do to work more with the faculty that study the macroinvertebrates in the nature preserve?
Yeah, so I would definitely recommend looking at the nature preserve website just to see as much information about what's going on there. And I know that there are and also too, I think they'll highlight any sort of news or research that's happening at the nature preserve, so that can give you an idea of what sorts of professors on campus are doing that research. I know that Dr. Hua, she is in biology. She does a lot of research related to different organisms in the nature preserve as well. So looking also at faculty web pages in environmental studies and obviously in biology as well. Usually they'll give an overview of the type of research they do, and I think would definitely highlight if they worked in the nature preserve.
That's a really good point. And just to let everybody know here that they are also able to go and see Professor Hua's mini lecture series. So that is something that we have upcoming on the calendar. So thank you for that one, that suggestion too, because that will be helpful. I think that's about all we got for our questions. So once
Great.
again, Sarah, thank you so much. And thank you to all that have attended today. We really appreciated this. And if you do have any additional questions, I know that Sarah has just given her information. You can at any time come to the Binghamton University undergraduate admissions website and talk to our staff there. We have both the Zoom office hours as well as we have Unibuddy, and then also there's the ability to call in as well. So we're here for you. Any more questions that you have? And once again, thank you, Professor Velardi, and I hope everybody has a good day and a great weekend.
Great.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.